Hey everybody, welcome back to another video. So I just finished reading Desolation Angels by Jack Kerouac and I want to talk about it. So this book was published in 1965 and it deals with the time period in Jack Kerouac's life right before On the Road was published in 1957. And the first part of this book deals with his time spent as a fire lookout at this place called Desolation Peak in northern Washington. And the second part of this book just deals with some traveling he did around the United States and Europe after his time spent as a fire lookout. So I was really looking forward to reading this book, but it wasn't quite what I expected. There were some good things, some bad things, but I was looking for more of a straight kind of narrative of what was happening in his life during this time period. But it's pretty much just a patchwork of different events, different memories, different things that happened, especially his time spent as a fire lookout. I was more interested in kind of getting a narrative of what happened during his 2 months spent as a fire lookout. But it's really just a patchwork of different memories and reflections and just him thinking about where he's going to go after his time spent as a fire lookout. So it's kind of all over the place. And he went to Desolation Peak with the intention of spending 2 months, in isolation alone, trying to meditate, trying to find inner peace, trying to kind of figure himself out. But you almost see that immediately after he got there, he was very uncomfortable in the isolation. He didn't like being alone. He just really wanted to be somewhere else as soon as he got there. Reading about his time at the fire lookout and the different reflections and memories he talked about, you really get the sense that Jack Kerouac had a lot of mental health issues. He really wasn't in the present. He just reflected a lot on his childhood. It's really focused on where he was going to go after his time at Desolation Peak. And throughout his books, he talks a lot about different Buddhist ideas that he had. He's very interested in Buddhism. But he failed really to find inner peace during his time at Desolation Peak. He really spent a lot of time reflecting on different Buddhist ideas that he had. But I get the sense with Jack Kerouac that he really liked Buddhist ideas, but in practice he really wasn't a Buddhist. He just liked reading about it, like thinking about it. I think he aspired to be more of a Buddhist in his life, but I don't really get the sense that he was. A lot of I think his writing about Buddhism is very hypocritical. He talks about, trying to find inner peace, trying to be pure, but that really wasn't the way he lived his life at all. So it's just kind of interesting sometimes to read about his reflections of Buddhism. But obviously he was very interested in it. He really wanted to find enlightenment, find inner peace. It just never really worked out for him during his time at, meditating at Desolation Peak. I think he really liked this idea, this concept of life being suffering, which is the main focus of Buddhism, because he had a lot of suffering in his life, a lot of bad experiences in the past that he was trying to overcome. So I think that was really his main attraction to Buddhism. But like I said before, I don't feel like he really fully embraced any Buddhist ideas throughout his life. So after finishing the part of the book where it talks about his time at Desolation Peak, I was a little bit disappointed. I really wanted a lot more. I really wanted to get a sense of just more of an everyday, what his life was like up there. And that's not really what you get by reading this book. It just, like I said, just kind of different reflections on random things that popped into his head while he was on the mountain there. But his narrative about leaving Desolation Peak is very interesting. I liked his description of himself hiking back down the mountain with his heavy pack and really being out of shape just from sitting around at the cabin for 2 months. And it was cool to see when he got back to, I believe it was like a ranger station down off the mountain, different fire lookouts and different mountains around the area were all kind of coming together, and they spent a couple of days spending time at different ranger stations and campgrounds, and they all were kind of heading back to Seattle to go different places here and there. And when he gets into this city, he really struggles with reintegrating back into civilization because he was in isolation for 2 months. So it was cool to see about the different reflections, kind of struggling with everything going around when he was in a very still place for so long. But almost immediately after getting out of the mountains, he goes to San Francisco, and it really goes into detail of him just partying with his friends for a week or so, bouncing around the city, staying with different people. It was really just this like week-long party that he just kind of falls into when he gets back into San Francisco there. And it started to get a little boring here and there. It just felt like it was the same thing again and again and again, just different parties, just them just kind of hanging out, talking about different philosophical ideas, talking about writing. It just kind of got repetitive after a while, but you do get a good sense of the beat culture in San Francisco during this time period. You really get a sense of how close all these people were. It was just this, non-stop party really around San Francisco. And then he goes to Mexico City for a bit, spending some time with some friends there and then from there he goes to New York. So really, I feel like Jack Kerouac in this part of his life, he was just kind of bouncing around between San Francisco, Mexico City, New York, just kind of going around the country just kind of repetitively. And then once he goes back to New York, it goes into his time. He went to Europe for a brief trip there. It was kind of like it felt like he just kind of went there, rushed around, and then came back. I think he said in this book even that he felt very rushed when he was in Europe. He kind of didn't really get what he wanted to get out of that quick trip to Europe. But after he gets back, he just been traveling with his mother, and he kind of goes into another trip he did across the country. You get a sense that Jack Kerouac was kind of in this period of just endless travel. It was just non-stop traveling. He just wasn't comfortable being still. I think that kind of explains why he was so uncomfortable at Desolation Peak. He just needed to constantly move. He wasn't comfortable when he was still. And I get a sense when people get to this point of this constant traveling where they're not really traveling anymore, they're just running away from themselves. They're just trying to find somewhere where they feel safe and secure, and they never quite find that. And this rambling time period was where he was when On the Road was finally published. So you can see that he really wasn't quite in a good mental state for On the Road to become this huge best-selling novel, for him to become this celebrity overnight. He really wasn't ready for that. I think with all his writing he did, he was hoping that he would get published, get some recognition, but I think that was kind of just this excuse that he was using for his traveling, that maybe it would lead somewhere good. But I think he just wasn't mentally ready to become this celebrity. He was still in the state of figuring himself out. I mean, he was in his 30s at this point, so I think at that point in his life, he wasn't really going to figure it out. He was just stuck in this endless cycle of travel, and being famous wasn't going to be a good thing for him. It didn't go quite into a lot of detail about On the Road being published. It kind of talked a little bit about, there was a scene where he was unboxing first shipment of books, but I wanted to hear a little bit more about his experience with the initial fame after On the Road was published, but didn't really go in too much detail about that. I felt like part two of this book was just kind of rambling all over the place. I don't feel like part two is really well written. The book definitely, I think, got worse as it went on. It just got more into this rambling stream of consciousness. I mean, there's a couple parts where it goes into some, kind of narrative and just kind of a little more not so chaotic writing, but as it went on, there was much more of just this stream of consciousness writing that he does. But anyway, I definitely enjoyed this book. I'm glad I read it. It was a little too long. Like I said, I feel like it could have been a little shorter. Talking about some of like the partying he did with friends, kind of hanging out. Like I feel like that could have been condensed into a much shorter section of the book, but it just kind of went on and on and on. I'm definitely glad I read it. I really wanted to read his reflections on his time spent at Desolation Peak, but it really wasn't what I had in mind going into it. As I'm reading now, I'm reading a lot of these lesser-known Jack Kerouac books, and I'm really not enjoying too much a lot of these lesser-known books. Obviously, my favorite books by him are Dharma Bums, On the Road, Big Sur, but a lot of his lesser-known books don't really do it for me the way that his more well-known books do. I'm kind of surprised. I thought that I would like a lot of these lesser-known books a little better, but I guess not all of his books are quite the same. So be sure to subscribe, and we'll see you in the next book review.